Hi, my name is Theo, and this is Mirror Talks. Here we have conversations with women who turn personal challenges into industry breakthroughs in health, hormone wellness, and advocacy. This podcast is powered by Mira, the hormone health monitor that helps you understand your body and make confident, informed decisions about your health and future. Today, I'm speaking with Priyanka Jain, a woman who back in high school was helping the United Nations launch a campaign to support the girls around the world. She worked on building schools in Afghanistan and made it onto the Forbes 30 under 30 list. She's the first person to say the word vagina live on Bloomberg, and she's one of the best pasta restaurant experts in New York. And if you want to know how she got to write this story for herself, stay till the end. This is going to be an incredible deep dive. Priyanka, how are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me today.
It's a pleasure having you here today. I'm really excited about our conversation. You mentioned at one point your health journey. Could you help me understand what challenges did you go through?
I mentioned a little bit about this, but I was dealing with a variety of different symptoms with my own health. And I went to, I live in New York. I went to every specialist, every, best doctor in the world at this and that. And I really tried to get to the bottom of what was causing my symptoms. And no matter how many tubes of blood I drew, how many scans I went through, how many different specialists I saw, no one could really ever get to the bottom of it. And, here I was sitting in my data company building algorithms saying, we can predict all of these different things. And I just couldn't believe that when it came to my health, nobody knew the right data to measure. There was no way to predict what was going on with me or how to fix it. And I just felt like there was such a large data gap when it came to the understanding of my body. And that was when I was doing my own research and realized, wow, this is not a me problem, right? This is actually a massive problem that's affecting so many women. And that was obviously what led me on the journey to starting Evvy.
It sounds indeed that not being heard for your symptoms and not finding the right solutions that you were hoping for gives you a certain pain that often we happen to turn into our passions. It sounds that that's
Totally.
one of the fuel that you used in building Evvy. But I want us to go a little bit back in time, in that moment when you were sitting at your doctor's office and you were looking for answers, right, for your symptoms. How did that experience feel for you?
Probably every woman who's listening to this can relate to some degree of the feeling like you go to the doctor and you leave with no answers, and if anything, more questions than you even came in with. And to be honest, I don't blame the doctors, right? Look, of course, there are doctors who dismiss women, who don't give us the greatest experience. But for me, I think it was more that they genuinely didn't have the tools, right? So many of the providers I talked to wanted to help. They believed me that I was in pain. It was obvious. It was visually obvious that something was not working in my body. But people couldn't find the solutions. And I think that was really frustrating for the doctors as well as it was for me. And I think it's a feeling of kind of helplessness and hopelessness, right? Like, how are we going to solve this if the world's experts have no idea what's going on? And honestly, saying I usually don't talk about my whole life story all at once. And it is interesting to think back to high school and think about, wow, there were so many of these girls who had everything stacked against them and they still had hope and resilience to build and to do better. And I think that you have to channel a little bit of them, right? And say, okay, in this moment in which nobody has answers for me, there seems to be no solutions. How do I channel this to take myself to a better place?
Can you remember maybe a specific moment when you were really hoping for a certain answer and you were provided with something entirely different, something that conflicted that feeling that you were hoping to get once you left the doctor's office?
I feel like this happens to me every day at work, but I'm sure, and also definitely happened to me when I was on my own health journey. Look, what you want to be told is I found the problem and here is the solution. And instead, I feel like what I was constantly told was we don't know exactly what's causing this, and therefore we don't really know how to solve it. And I think when I was doing my research on women's health and the gaps that exist, one of the things that really stood out to me was this idea that we had defined the diseases in women's health so broadly that they're actually impossible to pin down molecularly. And one of my advisors says this great thing about how so many diagnostics in women's health are about storytelling, where we don't actually know molecularly what to look for. So we just tell each other stories and we try to use those stories to figure out what's going on. And I think fundamentally, because these conditions are defined so broadly, and to give you examples, let's think about things like PCOS or bacterial vaginosis or menopause, right? Really, there are actually so many different things that cause the variety of symptoms and stories that we've clustered as this disease. But because we haven't actually defined these conditions molecularly, we don't have the diagnostics. We don't have the solutions, right? And so I think so much of the frustration that the patient feels at the doctor's office of why isn't there a test to tell me what's wrong? Why isn't there a solution? That comes back to the fact that we just don't have the basic science and research that would actually biologically define these problems in women.
This pain that you were feeling, right, when you were not feeling understood and when you didn't find the solution that you were looking for back at your doctor's office, how did you transmute that energy? How did you turn it into something else? I feel like, to your point, there are so many women nowadays that go through the same experience and they are left without any answers. If you would have one advice for them, how could they turn that pain into something that would help them overcome that feeling of feeling lost and unheard and unseen?
I mean, look, I don't think everybody needs to start a company, although if you feel moved to, I think the space absolutely needs more women to step in to help solve the problems. But I do think it's it's finding community. I think I joined, as I think so many women do, I joined every Facebook group, Reddit thread, everything that I could find other women dealing with similar problems to what I was dealing with. And I felt like I had so much kind of community and hope. And I wasn't a big contributor, but even just reading other people's stories just really made me feel so much less isolated in the problem. I think too is doing your own research. Like, there are actually so many more studies than any doctor can possibly know off the top of their head. I think that there was actually a study done that showed that the average time from scientific discovery to the bedside is 17 years. And so there's probably so much research that is out there that maybe your doctor just doesn't know about, because in what point in their day are they supposed to be catching up with all of those studies? So I think 2 is doing your own research. And then 3 is trying to find ways that you can take control of your own health, right? And obviously this is so much of what we are trying to help women do through Evvy, which is saying, can you actually own the data on your body? Can you help understand when you don't feel good or when something feels off? What is the molecular match to that? So that you can start to develop your own baseline, right? And I think, frankly, so much of what I'm talking about is really the concept of precision medicine, right? Which is saying, instead of treating everybody at a societal level, can we actually look at Priyanka specifically? What is going on specifically with her? And can we help improve that specific problem? And I think in women's health, we don't even have the data to define the problem, right? So how are we supposed to have precision solutions? And so I think what I am constantly advocating to women to do is to collect their own data on their own bodies so that they can be the people to unlock precision medicine for themselves. Because unfortunately, otherwise, precision medicine is going to be designed for men because those are the only people we have data on today.
And for everyone who listens to our conversation, could you help us understand in a few simple words, what's the difference between precision medicine and conventional medicine?
The easiest way to think about it is that conventional medicine is designed to treat the average, right? To say, on average, this is the problem, and on average, this is the solution. Meaning that in the majority of people, this tends to work. Versus saying, for Priyanka specifically, let's identify the specific things that are wrong, and then let's predict for her specifically what's most likely to help her, right? So how do her genetics or her microbiome or her sleep data or her hormones, how do all of those things look at any given time? And how do we make sure that the treatment program or lifestyle program or whatever she's on is actually tailored to her specific body, not just the average body that we've ever studied, which in America is men.
So what I gathered from you was that the support that helped you get over and get through this challenge of not being heard and seen and found a solution at your doctor's was to have a community. You were also doing your own research, right? Just hearing the stories from other women was also helping you feel heard and seen. Because I think that that's what we all need as women. Totally. We want to see that there are other people just like us who go through the same similar experience. It just helps us feel a little bit easy on ourselves. But were you, during all of this time, were you still working at your previous company?
Yes, I was. I mean, I left my job in August 2020 with the idea that there were so many new data sets that didn't exist in women's health, right? With this idea that there must be so many overlooked signals that the female body is giving off, where it's constantly asking us for help. It's telling us where the problem is. It's telling us what's going well. But we're just ignoring all of those signals because we only ever studied men. And so the only metrics that we measure and track are based on the male body. And I became really excited about this idea that if we could measure and track these unique female signals, right, these signs that our body is giving us of where we need help and where things are going well, we could do a much better job diagnosing disease in women or treating disease in women or predicting risk of disease in women earlier. And so I really wanted to focus on those biomarkers that had been under leveraged in healthcare because they were female specific. And that was the problem statement that I left my job to solve. And then it took me almost a year to get from there to really launching the first version of Evvy to our first patients.
So help me picture that day. How did that day look for you when you just decided that you were going to resign, to quit your current job?
I think that probably is other people who are listening to this any other founder has come to this moment where you think, wow, this problem is massive. The opportunity is massive. And I can't think about anything else, right? Like every day I'm reading scientific papers. I'm asking my friends about their experiences. I'm going to the doctor, not because I have a problem, but because I want to ask them questions about what they think is missing. And I think I was so motivated by my own experience and felt like maybe this opportunity to really bring together so many parts of my life, to bring together, making an impact on women, which is something I've always cared about, to bring together technology and data and AI, which is something I'd been working on for almost 10 years between school and my job, to bring together my passion for patients and consumers and design into a consumer solution, and that maybe I was actually an interesting person to solve this problem, right? And I think that something so many women I talk to who are in the early days of starting their company, they think, oh, but I'm not the doctor or I'm not the PhD or who am I to solve this problem? And I think I very much felt like I am an angry patient. I am the patient who has not gotten what I need from the healthcare system so many times. And can I use my skill sets, my access, my opportunities to actually bring together the experts, raise the money to actually get people to focus on solving this problem? And I think once you realize like, oh, I can play a big role in solving this, it could be me who solves this, it's very hard not to take that leap.
And how does one find the courage to take that leap?
I don't know if there's a perfect answer to that question. I think it's really hard. I think you'll never know. And I think that a lot of women I talk to who are thinking about starting a company are waiting for that moment of like, everything is perfect. I know for sure this is going to work. I know for sure all of these things. And I think the reality is you have to accept that so much of what you're doing is a leap of faith. And I always say to my team, there's probably whatever we believe is only 50% true probably at any given time. There's so much more that we don't know than we do know. And we just have to keep betting on ourselves. We say strong opinions loosely held, right? Let's take a step in a direction. And if we're wrong, we'll pivot. And I think that having that, instead of looking for certainty, it's being okay with the fact that this is a leap of faith. And I think reminding yourself that so many other people have done this. And like, who is to say that you can't do it too?
Did you have at the time a role model, someone who really inspired you on this journey? Because I think being an entrepreneur and starting your very first entrepreneurial journey by yourself, and I want to also hear about that story, whether you started by yourself or with someone, how did this idea start? Like, did you have someone who really was there to motivate you, to give you that courage that sometimes you couldn't find yourself?
Yeah, I mean, so actually both my dad and my brother are both both entrepreneurs. And so I had seen many times over what it looked like to start a company, for it to be hard, how you get through it. And so I very much feel so lucky that the process didn't feel completely foreign to me. It didn't feel completely impossible, because I think as soon as you see the inner workings of it and you realize that nobody really knows what they're doing, everybody's figuring it out as they go, it starts to feel so much more possible for you to do that also. And so I think having that very kind of close-up view of my family, and then also at the company that I was at before starting Evvy, I think those really humanized the experience of starting a company and gave me people to talk to when I was at any difficult stage in the journey. And so I'm very, very grateful for sure to my family.
That's wonderful to have your family members next to you being your biggest cheerleaders and your biggest motivators. So you're now at the stage where you are thinking about Evvy. Evvy doesn't exist yet, right? You are collecting your information, you're doing your research. What happens next?
Yes. Well, thankfully, I am not building Evvy alone. I have two amazing co-founders. One is actually a friend from Stanford who was in a lot of my design classes with me when I was there. And then the other is a friend I had met after, who is an amazing molecular biologist. And as I was starting to think about Evvy, I was looking at a variety of different biomarkers and what are the data sets that are specifically missing that I think could make the biggest impact in our ability to better predict and treat and diagnose conditions in women. And I had landed on the vaginal microbiome being this really exciting, overlooked area of women's health. Well, I'll give you a little bit on the vaginal microbiome because I think it'll explain why
tell me in simple words. First of all, what is the vaginal microbiome?
Very great question. I'm sure people have heard of the concept of a microbiome, right? Which is the idea that there are bacteria and fungi and viruses and these small microbes that live on or in different parts of your body, right? Most people have heard of the gut microbiome. There's also one in our mouths that's really important. There's one on our skin. And it turns out there's also one in our vaginas. And essentially, if you think about the vagina, it's essentially an open gateway between the outside world, which has every type of pathogen and microbe you could imagine. And then on the other side, you have your most important reproductive organs. And we've essentially evolved with the vaginal microbiome as this really kind of important immune barrier layer that protects the rest of the reproductive system. And the way that it does that is that when the vaginal microbiome is dominated by healthy protective bacteria, so the most common and popularized one is lactobacilli, maybe you've heard of that. What those bacteria do is they produce lactic acid, so they make the vaginal environment more acidic, and they take up space on the vaginal wall. And what that does is it makes it so that if any pathogens or bad microbes get into the vagina, which again, they do all the time because it's an open gateway, they're not
How do
able
they
to
get there? How do they get there?
I mean, again, your vagina is an open canal, right? So whether it's through the clothes you're wearing, through sex, through the role of so many different things. I mean, bacteria that could be on your hands, it could be products that you're putting on or near the vagina, your menstrual cycle, the changes in your hormones can affect the vaginal microbiome. So there are many things that play a role, or the use of antibiotics. You could take an antibiotic for an eye infection, and that can then affect your vaginal microbiome. So anytime those pathogens get in there, if you're dominated by those healthy protective bacteria, they actually make it really difficult for those bad bacteria to survive because it's too acidic of an environment. There's no space for them to set up shop on the vaginal wall because it's already crowded. And so in that way, they actually act as this really important immune system that's keeping those bad guys out of the system. But I always say, God forbid, to your point, you have sex with someone new. You sit in your swimsuit for too long. You have a long menstrual cycle, and menstrual blood has a higher pH, and that increases the pH of your vagina, and these bacteria start to replicate, right? We as women, that's what we experience as recurrent yeast infections or UTIs or bacterial vaginosis. What we're not thinking about is not only are we experiencing these frustrating symptoms, but now we've also lost this really important barrier for the rest of the reproductive system. And what you see is that those bad bacteria start to make a home in the vagina. They start to travel up the reproductive tract. They start to cause inflammation and infection. And what all of these studies I was reading were showing that having this disrupted vaginal microbiome then affected fertility outcomes, whether it was natural fertility, whether it was IVF cycles, miscarriage rates, preterm birth rates, cervical cancer progression, STI acquisition, endometriosis relapse. I mean, you name it. And I could not believe that on one hand, vaginal discomfort is the leading reason women go to the doctor in the US. So it is extremely prevalent. Something like 30% of women at any given time have at least one vaginal infection. And when we go to the doctor today, we are more likely to be misdiagnosed than correctly diagnosed. And then we are more likely not to get better than we are to get better. So you have this incredibly prevalent but horribly managed condition affecting so many women. And then there's all of this research showing that what's going on in the vaginal microbiome is not just the cause of those symptoms, but it actually is playing this really important role in fertility and pregnancy and cancer progression and menopause and endometriosis and all these other things. And I just could not believe that nobody was using any of that data to help women improve their outcomes. And so that felt like a very obvious place to start, where with something as simple as a Q-tip swab that you could take at home, you could get insights into all of this information that can help you with, again, the leading symptom that is driving women to the doctor, but then also help improve your outcomes in all of these areas. We decided to start there, and I was so excited to bring on my two co-founders, Lane and Peta, who helped both build the brand and the story around Evvy. I think so much of what has made us successful is that we are a brand built with the community. We are a brand that people trust. We are destigmatizing these conditions that people have been too scared to talk about, too shamed to talk about. And we talk about them with science, because at the end of the day, these are science and medical problems that we're dealing with. So building the brand and building the trust, and then building the science and the product. And how are we going to test for these things? How do we validate this type of assay? How do we bring whole genome sequencing to the vagina? And so it was an amazing, I think it was like 6 or 8 months from when we all kind of teamed up with that focus to getting the first product in the market. And I still look back on that time with such fondness. I think talk about a time where we had so many constraints. We were 3 people. We had no resources. And getting something to market that had never really been done before was really one of the most fulfilling things I think I've ever done.
And if you look back to that moment, just when the 3 of you started talking, how did you end up teaming up? I wonder, how did you bring this idea? Because you were the first one doing all of the research, right? How did you bring this idea to them? Can you tell me that story? How did the 3 of you got to work together?
Lane is the one who I went to college with, and she had been at Google Creative Lab. She was working at Tribeca Film Festival. She'd always had these really kind of amazing creative jobs. And as I was leaving my job, starting to work on ideas for Evvy, her and I would just catch up, and not for any specific purpose, but because I trusted her as a thought partner and as somebody who would give me really great feedback and ideas and pressure test different directions I could go. And I remember coming to her saying, I think that the vaginal microbiome is this really interesting opportunity. And she immediately latched onto it and was like, that's such a great idea. It's the right moment for this type of product in the industry. People are going to be excited about this. The research is so compelling. There's a great brand to be built here. And I remember she was supposed to go to the dentist that day, and she never went. We sat for hours and we talked about it. And that was kind of the beginning of me, luring her away from her job. And it was probably only a month later that we got connected to Peta, who was actually working on starting her own company. She was also focused on women's health. And someone connected us and said, you guys should talk. I think you are interested in similar areas. And I remember sending her an email this long with look at all these studies on the vaginal microbiome. We have to do this. You're a molecular biologist. You have the right skill set to make this happen. And I remember she didn't email me back for 3 weeks. And I remember being like, oh no, we just lost the perfect person to help be the third pillar of our company. And she came back to me 3 weeks later and was like, I'm compelled. Tell me more. I want to know more. And then basically once we kind of got her, the 3 of us started working together full time in January 2021. And it was just a mad sprint to July when we got the product out into the market.
Sounds like the 3 brains got together at the right time, creating something absolutely fantastic for women. The work that you do with Evvy is brilliant. I looked into the company and the work that you do there. But now, if you were to tell me in a few words what Evvy is, how would you describe it?
Evvy is harnessing the vaginal microbiome to improve women's health outcomes. That is our focus. We believe the vaginal microbiome is massively under-leveraged, that it has so much information to tell us that we're not using today. The way we do that is we provide patients and doctors with the first ever at-home vaginal microbiome test. So a patient can take a sample at home. It goes back to our lab where we do whole genome sequencing to, for the first time, help patients and doctors actually understand what's happening. What is the balance of bacteria? Is it good or bad? What type of bad bacteria? And we always say, we're just turning on the lights, right? We're just saying, here is actually what's happening. And that's the first part of the platform. The second part of the platform is taking that information, combining it with everything we know about that person, right? So we found these specific molecular signatures. We know that she has these symptoms. We know that she's in menopause, or we know she's on a certain birth control, you name it. And we use all of that information to then predict the specific treatments and ingredients that are most likely to help that patient get better. And then we're able to actually prescribe custom compounded vaginal suppositories to help optimize that patient's vaginal microbiome, both to help them get out of vaginal symptoms that they might be experiencing, so things like discharge or odor or discomfort or itching, but also to help rebuild that protective vaginal microbiome that we know improves outcomes in spaces like fertility and pregnancy and menopause and cervical cancer and so much more. And so we have those two key parts of the platform. Today, we work with over 75,000 patients, over 2,000 doctors across the country. And excitingly, we've now built the world's largest data set ever on the vaginal microbiome. And so now we are finally pushing forward the research to take this data to make it clinically actionable to help women get to better outcomes.
Wow. Well, for anyone who's outside the medical space, everything that you just said sounds extremely complicated and very complex. Like, how did you, the three of you, without the medical background, I mean, you had the third co-founder having that biomolecular experience, but then how did the three of you manage to get to the market? You said 6 to 8 months. That's what it took you to get to the market, the first product. How did you manage to do that?
I mean, the first version of the product is definitely not nearly as robust and amazing as it is today. The first version of the product was just giving you answers to what's happening in the microbiome, right? And so we brought on tons of advisors that were both molecular biologists, researchers on the vaginal microbiome, people who had built microbiome tests for other types of microbiomes, right? So we were learning from people who had built gut microbiome tests or oral microbiome tests. And we were trying to bring together, the experts on the sequencing, testing, validation side with the experts on the vaginal microbiome, both from a scientific as well as a clinical perspective. And then we brought the patient perspective. And for the first time, you kind of put all those people in a room and you said, okay, how do we solve this? And we were chasing different types of vendors and labs, trying to figure out, who could help us build the solution that patients and doctors really needed. And I think so much of it came from just bringing the right experts around the table and then centering the voice of the patient and what the patient really needed.
But also I can imagine that for the three of you being also very young on your very first entrepreneurial venture for each one of you, how did you also overcome that? Probably some would describe it as the imposter syndrome, also because you were lacking that medical certification yourself. How did you overcome that? You mentioned it a few seconds ago, that there was this feeling that made it a little bit more challenging to navigate this medical world without you being a certified person in the space.
Totally. I think, and I say this to so many women who are building in women's health, it's like to improve women's health is going to take more than just doctors, right? As a patient, you have such an important voice, which is to say you are the person who is frankly the customer of the healthcare system. What are the things that you need? What are the things that you want? How do you want this system to function for you? That was the perspective that we were bringing, which is to say, that's not good enough for the patient. We need to do better than that. Women deserve better than that. Instead of saying, this is what we know how to do today, which, might be what an expert would tell me. Well, we would say, well, we have to do better. So how do we do better, right? And I think we were really the voice of pushing for the innovation and the experience that we knew that patients really wanted. And our job was to find the experts who could help us make that happen. And frankly, if we hadn't started Evvy, maybe there wouldn't have been $25 million put to work against solving the problems of the vaginal microbiome, right? So I think also remembering that your passion, your energy, like the amazing team of 30 people who now work at Evvy, maybe they wouldn't have been focused on this problem if it hadn't been for us, right? So our job was to bring together the right people, focus on the right problem, bring the resources in the door so that this could actually be funded and focused on, and then push for something that actually meets the expectations and the desires that our patients have. And I think there's so much more to building a company and solving a problem than just the scientific and medical expertise, which is absolutely critical, but it doesn't mean that it's the only skill set you can have in order to solve a problem in the space.
And can you remember one specific moment when maybe you were in a meeting or in a conversation where you felt like you didn't have the right expertise to lead that conversation and you felt the need of adding an expert to the table to lead that conversation?
Totally. I mean, it happens all the time. I'm never the expert in any conversation, right? My job, I should always say, I should never be the smartest person in the room. Otherwise, I've done something wrong, right? Our job is to bring together the experts and bring, again, the problems, the opportunities to those experts to help us design the best solution. I mean, when we were starting Evvy, we started with rooms of patients and rooms of doctors saying, what are the needs that you have? Why isn't this problem being solved? How do you wish this worked? And we became, I guess, the experts on what they needed. And then we brought those things, the scientific and medical experts who could help us design a better solution. I almost think that there is a humility that comes from not having the letters after your name, which is I never assumed I was the expert. I never went into the room and pretended to be, right? We went into the room and we said, we've got to be able to do better. Help me solve it. And not saying, I know everything.
And if you look now back in time from standing now where you are, a few years into building Evvy, what is it, 5 years already?
We launched about 4.5 years ago, little less than that, but yeah.
Yeah, so almost 5 years. So from this place where you're sitting right now and looking back to the past 4.5 years, what was the biggest challenge in bringing the company to the point where it is right now?
Everything is hard when you're starting a company. You just have the motivation to get through it, given the fire you feel for the problem. I think the hardest part of building Evvy, still to this day, is education. I think we are constantly educating patients, educating doctors, helping people understand the importance of the vaginal microbiome, helping them understand that they have one, what it is, why they should care about it, how does this impact your fertility, why should I care about this? And so I think that we've put an enormous amount of resources and effort behind education. I mean, just like this amazing work that you're doing with this podcast, right? So much of what we have to do is educate women about our bodies because the system didn't do that for us, right? And so we take on the burden of doing that kind of highest level education and then the education about our product. But I mean, even as we've said on this show, like we have to start with the education of there is a gender health gap. We didn't study women. Women don't even know that. And then to say that the vaginal microbiome matters and this is a super important biomarker that you should be paying attention to. And then, oh, by the way, you should buy the Evvy product, right? And so the amount of effort we have to put into education at all of those levels is really hard, right? And we have to take on that burden in order to get people to the moment where they understand why they should use our product.
Right. So education is key indeed in bringing that awareness about the importance of the vaginal microbiome. And so that would be more of a challenge on a business level, right? On a professional level. But how about you, Priyanka? What was your personal challenge? Something that you had to overcome on a more personal level? Maybe about your health journey, because a few years before starting Evvy, right, you were going through some challenging times finding answers for yourself.
I definitely the good news on my own health journey is I did find a specific problem that we did find a treatment for. I mean, that's why I'm standing here, not in the pain and struggling that I was before. And so I feel like that was such a gift. And I think being connected to the right doctor who knows the right thing to look at to find the problem and get you to the right solution. I mean, that absolutely changed my life. When I think about personally building Evvy, I think it's just the getting back up, right? Constantly. It's the constant feeling of like, okay, that didn't work, or that was a tough meeting, or that was a tough interaction, or another investor who didn't know about or care about the vaginal microbiome, or you name it, and having to pick yourself up, but then also pick up the whole team, right? Like I have to keep the energy and the motivation and the forward-leaning energy and momentum for the whole company. And sometimes you have to start with yourself, right? Like you got to pick yourself up and then you have to pick up everyone else. And I think that having to do that every hour, every day, every week every year, it's hard. And I think that really what gets you through it is the belief that there really is such an amazing opportunity here to help so many people, and like truly believing that in your core, and the fulfillment you get out of every time you really do help somebody. We got an amazing message the other week from a woman who told us that she had done 8 rounds of IVF and for the first time got pregnant after using Evvy and identifying the problem and using our solutions. And she said, I give 99% credit to Evvy and 1% credit to my body for getting me to where I am today. And I think that between the belief that this needs to exist in the world and feeling the daily stories of the women who tell you how you impact their lives, it's like, you got to milk that for all that it's worth to give yourself the motivation to pick yourself up.
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with exactly what you said. Like having that very personal impact on someone's life, that's a feeling that no other accomplishment can equal.
Totally. 100%.
And so now that you're on the other side, right? You found your way in life. You found your passion, your purpose, your mission. When you look back now to how a conversation about women's health and about all of these topics that some people still consider taboo, right? Like, how does it feel for you now to talk openly and publicly about things like vagina, like hormone health, anything pertaining to what was once considered taboo?
It's funny, I forget that these are taboo terms. I feel like I don't even flinch when I talk about Evvy anymore. And so I think that's where we should get for everyone, right? How do we get to a world in which we can talk about vaginal health the same way we would talk about your elbow or, your appendix, right? I feel like those terms for some reason don't have the same taboo associated with them. And I think that talking about vaginal health in the scientific and medical way that Evvy does kind of normalizes the fact that this isn't something to be ashamed of. And one of the biggest pillars of our company, like I said, is education. And we have a phenomenal TikTok. If people haven't seen it, we have an amazing Instagram, an amazing blog, where so much of what we do is like make it possible for us to laugh about these things that we all deal with, right? And I think normalizing them, talking to them in both plain kind of funny terms, but then also treating women like they're smart enough to understand the science and the research. I find it so refreshing and so fun to do that. And I really hope that our brand and our company sets a tone for how we can talk to women about other parts of their health too, right? Because I think that what we've shown is that it's possible and that it works. And I think women deserve to be talked to in that same way in so many other arenas of their health as well.
All right. And Priyanka, now that you know so much more about the female body, right? You know so much more about the vaginal microbiome, about hormone health, and everything surrounding women's health. I wonder, how did your self-care rituals change over time, if they changed?
I always laugh that the people who work in healthcare are the worst patients. I mean, look, I take care of my vaginal microbiome because now I know how important that is for so many things that I care about for the rest of my life. I am a huge sleeper. I have an Oura ring. I deeply believe in making sure I get enough sleep. I sleep 8 to 9 hours every single night. I always make time for a morning exercise routine. I think it makes me a much better leader. It helps me go to the office having released a lot of tension and with some great endorphins in my body. And I try to eat well. So, I mean, really nothing mind-blowing. You sleep, you exercise, you eat well. And for me, I really make sure I take care of my vaginal microbiome and spend a lot of my time educating other people about why they should do that too.
And if you were now to choose just one tool that helped you change your relationship with your own body, what was that tool for you?
Okay, I'm not going to say Evvy because that feels like cheating. Honestly, Oura. I love the Oura ring. I have been an Oura ring user since probably 2019, I want to say, so a very long time. And I think that I've learned so much about how different behaviors that I have actually really affect my, like how rested and well I can do the next day. A great example being like when you eat dinner. Now I'm so much better at eating dinner as early as I possibly can because I know the number of hours I have between when I eat and when I go to sleep means that my sleep will be so much better. And so you could be asleep for the same amount of time, but that time is so much more productive if you had eaten earlier in the day or if you didn't have that drink. And I think that there's something so empowering about seeing the data on your own body, feeling like you're in control of it, that you can make the decisions, then impact those metrics. And so I feel like Oura has been an amazing partner for me on that journey.
I've been speaking to a lot of women also in my community about having access to data about their health. And on one side, we all see the benefits of having so many data points about, as you said, like sleep, recovery, just overall well being. Where do you see the line between being too obsessed about all of the data points that we can nowadays collect about our health and using those data points to our own benefit?
I think it's a really good question. I think that it's, first of all, it's, I think, the job of the companies to help you interpret the data. So you should not have to look at all of the raw metrics yourself and try to make sense of them. That's extremely overwhelming. They should help you understand what these metrics are and why they matter. But I think at the end of the day, you have to decide what you really care about. What are the outcomes that you are really trying to drive? Because you're only one person. You have so many other things going on in your life that matter. Because guess what else contributes to your health? Having a fulfilling career, having social connection with people that you love and people around you. So you can't just obsess about the metrics on your body, because you might be actually taking away from other things that would have contributed to your health even more. And so I think you have to really decide what it is that you care about. So many patients that come to Evvy, they care about either getting out of a cycle of symptoms and pain with vaginal symptoms, whether that's in menopause or not, or they really care about fertility and pregnancy and improving their outcomes in those areas. And so we try to provide really useful tools for women on those specific journeys, right? But I think that when you get to trying to optimize everything in your body, it can just be overwhelming. And so I think it's realizing, what is the outcome that you're actually trying to drive? What are the best possible tools to actually help improve that? Is it your energy? Is it your mental clarity? Is it your physical performance if you're an athlete? Whatever those things are that you care about, I think it's real figuring out what matters most to move those metrics and not getting distracted by the noise of other things.
Exactly, because also having so many data points nowadays and having this access, such an easy access to so much information about our bodies can, to your point, do exactly the opposite, right? When we start this obsessive behavior of having all of those markers within the right ranges, that in itself can be very stressful and damaging other parts of our well-being. So to your point, finding that balance, I think that's key, right? Finding a few metrics, focus on those, and ensure that you optimize on those, not on all of them. Because honestly, I believe that optimizing on all possible health metrics, that's a very ambitious dream to have, but it's not something realistic. Or
Totally.
at least,
And I also think most metrics are based on men. So I'm also like, a lot of the companies that are telling you to track these certain metrics or look at these things in your blood, it's like, are those metrics actually useful for me specifically? And that's where, again, I think you have to start with the goal or the outcome that you are trying to achieve, and then figure out in your body, if you are a female, what are the metrics that my body is giving off that actually measure that outcome? Because I think the default is not for women.
Priyanka, you're fantastic. You're such a lovely energy. You have this incredible ambition, very inspiring for me personally, and I'm sure to all of our listeners. Now, before we close it off, I wonder if there is any question that you wish I asked you and I haven't asked.
Wow, what a great question. Let me think. Honestly, I think you really touched on it all.
Fantastic.
I can't think of anything else. No, thank you so much. I mean, you are such an inspiration in all of the amazing work you're doing to raise awareness for so many women around the world to learn about their own health and their own bodies. So thank you so much for the work you do and for having me.
This was wonderful, Priyanka. It really felt like speaking and looking at the mirror. I could see myself in so many of the stories, honestly, that you were telling. And as I said, like, you're an inspiration to me personally and to many of our listeners today. You are doing an amazing work with Evvy. And congratulations for everything and everything that you've achieved. And keep up that smile. It looks really beautiful on that face. And it really shows that the work that you're doing it out of passion. So
you're too kind. We have much more to do than we have done. So no congratulations yet.
We're going to speak again then. I hope so.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Priyanka. This was Mirror Talks. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to podcasts. If this episode spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Tap the likes, hearts, and stars, but most importantly, hit share. Send it to a friend, drop it in your group chat, or post it in your stories. Every share helps more women learn more about their bodies and live their lives free from the limits of shame. Check out our website, miracare.com, for tools, helpful articles, and free ebooks. And use the code ListenToMira for a special discount. Don't forget to follow us on social media for more. This is Theo, sending you love.